excited. We have a whiz-bang speaker tonight. His name's Derek, and he's from Hattiesburg. And I don't really know a whole lot more about him. He's just dressed up nice, and he's going to bring it tonight, Derek. We're welcome. Thank you so much for showing up and doing service work for us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Recording in progress.
My name is Derek. I am an alcoholic, and my sobriety date is June 3rd of 1998, and my home group is the Rule 62 group in Hattiesburg, and I am actively sponsored today. And is there a time limit so I can set my timer?
Yeah, you got till about 5 till, Derek.
Okay, cool. I often don't go as long as I am allotted, so don't be surprised if we end earlier. Okay. So thanks a lot for asking me to speak. I have wanted to come to this Wednesday night grace group and have not come, and now here I am. So thank you for getting me here. I hold several members of this group in high regard and do 12-step work with them. And so I joke a lot that if I get mad at my home group, I think I'm just going to go join Grace Group because, they're still not doing it right. And I'll talk a little bit about my history with home groups too. So thanks for asking me. It's always an honor to share my story. It's been a short minute since I have shared my story. And, it's funny, somebody brought up like several commitments in a row, and I got sober in Chicago, and, most meetings had a speaker at the beginning, and it was, you ended up, if you were in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous, you ended up speaking quite often. It was a regular occurrence. And that's just been different in the places I've lived since then. So my story starts in what I thought was a horribly small town in Michigan. Come to find out, in reality, it's a nice place. People raise families there. It's a safe community, and it's a desirable place to live. But I could not wait to get out of there. And what I know today is, that was my alcoholism. Like, I gotta go. I gotta go explore the world and get into trouble. And I mean, I didn't know that at the time, but that is what it was like. Like, I wanted to get out of there. And so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on my drinking. I'll just touch the highlights. I began drinking. The first drink I took was at age 11. Everybody was gone. I'm home alone, watching Love Boat and Fantasy Island, and there's the corner cabinet that I know there's booze in the back of the cabinet hidden. So I pour a tumbler with a little bit of everything, and I sit down in front of the TV, 11 years old, and I sip this drink. And I didn't get drunk. There's no tragic story, and I didn't throw up or anything. But I knew I was being sneaky, and I knew I liked it. And I didn't really start drinking until 16. And from that point forward, what I know today is I drank as much as I could, as often as I could. And I was already trying to control it right from the get-go. And like, I can only order 2 quarts of Miller from the buyer guy who would go and buy us the beer because I don't want to look like I'm drinking too much. And but then also handing the guy the money and going, is this going to be enough? Is this going to be enough? And what I'm aware of today too is normal drinkers don't think that way. They don't ask those kind of questions. Is it going to be enough to what? Well, get loaded, because that worked for me early on. So by the time I was 19, I drove in a blackout. This town I lived in was about an hour away from Detroit, and you could get into nightclubs when you were 18. You couldn't drink in the nightclub unless you were 21, but they allowed 18-year-olds to get into nightclubs. And of course, I'm going to go to the nightclubs, the day I turn 18. And I also did a lot of drinking in Canada bit too, because the drinking age was 19 and I lived an hour from the Canadian border. So I did a lot of drinking in Toronto, Windsor, Sarnia. So by the time I'm 19, I drive in a blackout. I cross the center line. I hit a car head on. Nice gentleman going to work. And I'm nearly killed. My passenger is severely injured, and so is the gentleman driving the oncoming car. I wake up come to in the hospital, jaw wired shut. My head is, the size of a basketball. And my first thoughts are, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to lie about this? What's the story I'm going to tell? And I did not take responsibility at all. My mother knew a good lawyer and helped me get out of the situation as best I could. I think I lost my license, but I didn't go to jail. I didn't know charges. And I fully did not take responsibility for that accident at the time. As soon as I could drink again, I did. My jaw's wired shut. I'm missing a tooth back here, and I can fit a straw in between the wires and drink. And the people I drank with, I'm 19, they're like, is that a good idea? Like, do you really think you should be drinking? And I'm like, yeah, that's what we do. And so I moved to Detroit. I start meeting the right people that drink like me, and 23 years old, I'm starting to not enjoy my drinking anymore. And I'm miserable, and I'm starting to use other substances so I can drink as much as I want, as often as I want. And I'm living in this glorified flop house. It was a really cool place. It had little one-room apartments around a big theater. This guy owned this whole building, and it had a big theater in the middle with little apartments, like the old offices were apartments. And we all drank, and it was a party. It was a party palace. I loved it. I really thought I had arrived. And this guy moves in. He's going to the University of Detroit, and he's sober. And I'm like, what a weirdo, what a weirdo. And he went to AA, so I knew he was a loser, but he was funny. He had a really attractive personality. And so we become friends, and I start talking to him about my drinking. And I wake him up at 6 a.m. one day, and I'm like, you got to help me. And he goes, okay, promise me we'll go to a meeting together tomorrow. I go pass out, I do what I got to do, and then it's time to go to the meeting. And he's like, you ready? And I'm like, can we go next week? Like, can we put this off? Can we reschedule? And he said, well, you said you would go. So I go to the meeting, I walk in, everybody I'm sure was very lovely. And I walk out of there, and I'm like, I am not doing that. Whatever they're doing in there with the hugs, and I always say potlucks. Nobody said anything about potlucks, but that's how I saw it. Like, you're going to make me be a missionary, and I'm going to have to go to potlucks. And I just walked out, and I was like, there may be something wrong with me, but I'm not doing AA. So I attend one meeting, and I'm going to stay sober on my own. And I did for a few months. And this friend in the building is always having these sober people over, and they're like, people who are sober go to AA. And they were trying to encourage me, and I was like, I'm good, I'm fine. And then one day, this friend of mine, his name was Todd, we're at a bar together, and he goes, Derek, because I still go to bars, right? I'm not drinking, but I'm of course going to continue to go to bars. And he goes, I don't think you have a problem. I don't think you're an alcoholic. And I go, you're right. I was so relieved. Like, I didn't even know it, but I had been waiting for permission to drink again. And I'm already starting to get really crispy and man, I was ready to go. And in a short time, I'm back to drinking the way I always had, drugs like I always had. But then it starts to accelerate and progress. And I end up moving to Chicago with $700 in my pocket because I knew a couple people who were moving, and it sounded like a good idea. I'd had a bad breakup with a 3-month relationship. That was my height of long-term relationship was 3 months. And so I had this bad breakup. I'm like, I'm going to go to Chicago and reinvent myself. So I moved to Chicago, and of course, you know what happens. I'm farther away from anybody I know. My family's out of the picture. I don't know anybody, and it's a great, big, huge playground of debauchery. And I meet the right people. My life I do not reinvent myself. I go downhill faster. And what ends up happening is at the end of my drinking, like my friend Sunday says, I was dead inside. I was in this black hole of despair, fear, psychosis. I was regularly hallucinating in my apartment. I lived with a guy who I met at a bar. And, I would be convinced that there were people in the apartment, and really, really bad. And a friend from Detroit came to visit and said, you're in trouble. You may not see it, but you're in trouble. And he said, I want you to get some help. So I make an appointment for intake at I think it was called the Lakeshore. Is that the treatment center, Rick? The Lakeshore Hospital. It's a treatment center. And I go there, and, the first question is, what insurance do you have? And I go, see, everything's stacked against me. I can't get sober because I don't have health insurance. And they're like, because they're like, it's going to be $30,000 or whatever it is. But what I don't listen to is the very kind gentleman, the intake person, says, you could try Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm like, well, we know we're not doing that because I'm not doing AA. But I go home, and I'm very depressed. I can't get sober. I try again on my own. And in the meantime, while this is all unfolding, this woman comes to work at my job. Her name is Daima. And she lives in New York today, wonderful woman. She comes to work at this restaurant I work at, and she's sober, just like the Peter guy. God, I'm not a call AA, reach out. But God puts people in front of me, and I take it or I don't take it. But so she shows up, and she is sober, just like Bill writes about Ebby. He was sober in italics. She was sober, and she was different. Everybody I worked with, I drank with. I was the bartender at this posh downtown restaurant. I was the medicine provider. I gave everybody drinks during work. We were all drinking. And there's this sober woman who's very funny, and I like her personality too. And I become friends with her. And at one point along the way, she's like, I know what your problem is. I just don't think you're ready for the solution. And I was like, how dare you talk to me that way? And but eventually the day comes when I leave work again because I can't work. And I can't work because my mind won't function. I can't think clearly. And my boss says, what do you mean you can't work? And I said, I can't do this. And she says, get out of here. You're not fired, but you're on thin ice. Get out of here. So I walk out, and mind you, it's, I think it's the afternoon. Yeah, it was the early afternoon, and I can't work. So I go outside, and here comes this woman who is sober, Daima. She's walking down the street to come to work to pick up a check or something. I don't know, but she wasn't working. And there she is. And she goes, you don't look so good. And I said, well, I don't feel good. And she said, are you ready? And I said, I think I'm ready. I don't know what to do. And she said, well, I do. And she took me to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I always describe it. It was like a claw on my forearm. She put a firm grip on my arm. And I tried to pull the "can we go later" thing again. I say, I need to get ready. I got to go home and shower and prep myself. And she says, "No, we're going now." And so she took me to an AA meeting. I cried through the whole thing, and people were very nice. And afterwards, she said, "What do you want to do now? You look like you need to eat," because I'm, very underweight. I'm a meth head too by this point. And I said, "I want to go to another meeting." That felt good. And that's how the journey started for me. And I don't know, there's a God, right? Because I'm not going to do AA, it's for losers. But, that additional 5 years of drinking beat me into a state of submission. And she and I became fast friends. And we did the full tour of Alcoholics Anonymous in Chicago. I mean, every day was a new meeting and a new judgment about, was that a good meeting? Was that a bad meeting? Who, just crazy, untreated, and I can't speak about her, but me, untreated alcoholic. But I had this willingness. And so we ran around together, and she gets a sponsor and starts working out of the big book in this very, here's my judgment again, very structured line of sponsorship out of Montana. And I'm like, whoa, that seems drastic. And so, I'm judging it, but I'm also watching my friend literally transform in front of because I see her every day. And she's literally transforming because she got this, sponsor and is working out of the big book. And we find this group called Between the Covers. And that was in around that time, which later became my home group, but a structured big book home group on the north side of Chicago. And so what happened for me was I hire and fire a couple sponsors, because you said, they said, get a sponsor. The first one was too easy. He didn't know what he was talking about, because I judge, and, I'm seeing my friend change, and this he doesn't know what he's talking about. So I fire the first sponsor, I get a tough sponsor, and I'm immediately like, don't tell me what to do. He was really direct. He told me to call him at 9:00 every night. And like the third night, I called him at 8:58. And he said, "I told you to call at 9 p.m. And he call me back at 9:00, and he hung up. And I was like, what? This is not kind and loving. How dare you talk to me that way? And I penned this scathing letter to him on a paper grocery bag. That's what I wrote it on, because that's what I had. That's what I had available to write this letter. And I gave it to him. I think I mailed it to him, but he needed to know, how you can't talk to people that way. So I'm now again without a sponsor. And at 3 months dry, I start to unravel. My mind starts to unravel. I can't cope with anything. I walk out of a meeting. I feel good in the meeting. I get the juice from you guys, and then I walk out and I'm crazy. I'm afraid. I can't keep my mouth shut at work. Very upset all the time. My life is a wreck. How am I going to figure out all this tax stuff and all the debts I owe? And very scared. So one morning I go to make a pot of coffee, and I dump the coffee grounds on the floor. I'm getting ready to go to a meeting. I dump the coffee grounds on the floor, and that was the snapping point for this alcoholic. I end up on the floor in the fetal position because I can't even make a pot of coffee. And I have quit drinking, and my life was supposed to get better when I quit drinking. That's what I thought was the truth. Like, alcohol's my problem, so quit drinking, nirvana, right? Well, that's not how it was. My life was getting worse. And so I went to the meeting, and I had this interior thought, I'll do whatever those AA people tell me to do. And I talked to this woman, and she directs me to this guy in Houston named Eric. And I thought, well, this is insane. Why would I call somebody in Houston? There's 4,500 weekly meetings in the Chicago area. Surely we can find somebody closer. But now my mouth is shut because I'm willing to listen. I didn't know it, but I was willing to listen to direction other than my own because of this coffee pot incident. So I call the guy in Houston, and he says, yeah, I'll take your case on. And he was sponsored in this same line of sponsorship as these women I knew. And I think his sponsor was in Montana or Seattle. I can't remember, it's been so long ago, but his sponsor was somewhere else, and he agreed to work with me, and we started talking on the phone once a week, reading the big book. I was given a daily suggestions: pray on your knees, morning and night, try to meditate, go to meetings, suggestions for prayers, meditation books, get into the book. And that's what we did. And I really didn't think it was going to work for me. I just felt so messed up inside and lost and sad and afraid. And, I thought I'm never going to feel better. And that strong home group said, we don't care how you feel, get on the slow moving train. If you want what we have, do what we do. And, they weren't mean about it, but they were firm, loving and firm. And so I got in the middle of that group, and this group of people who were running around all over town, speaking, going into jail, going into treatment centers, being of service. Some of them were active in general service, but a lot of them were active in the things that I do with Josh and Eric, going into the jail and treatment centers. And so I got busy. I got into the steps. And really for this alcoholic, it was 2 years of solid work in the book, thorough inventory, making amends, so much writing. I would often call my sponsor and be like, this is a lot. And he's like, well, you are a sick alcoholic. And he would say it in a kind way, but it's like, and I wanted relief quickly. And I'll never forget it. He said, well, how long did you drink? And I'm like, well, 16 to 28. I drank for 12 years. He's like, why don't we give this solution 12 years? And then we can revisit and see if it's not working. And, just things like that would shut me up. And he talked about it being a process. We're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to be finished, but this is an unfolding thing your whole life. And, those things he said to me always put things into perspective and always calmed me down. And I just was really willing to listen to him. I know some people can argue with their sponsor or fight or, I had an internal fight. I did not argue with him. I didn't always do what he suggested, but I didn't argue with him. And he was so kind and loving. And I didn't even meet the guy till I went to Houston to do my third step. So we had about 25 years together with sponsorship, and I do have an in-town sponsor today. But so what started to happen for me was my life started to get better, of course, because I'm working the steps. I repair the relationship with my family members, mom, dad, brother, sister-in-law, made amends, and it still took them a long time to trust me. I feel like it was years before my brother and sister-in-law really believed that I had changed and that I was living a different life, because, the shoe always dropped before, so why is it not going to happen now? So repair relationships with my family, repaired relationships in work. I became a better worker. I did almost get fired though in early sobriety. I'd never been fired from a job because I'm a good alcoholic. And if you get fired, you're probably an alcoholic. So I made sure to never get fired. But I was about 6 months sober, and the boss pulled me aside and said, your attitude is causing problems here. And I was like, what? My attitude? I'm sober. My life is improving, and they didn't care about whether I was sober or not. They cared about that I was yelling at my coworkers and judging the boss and telling my boss how to do her job. And I was a terror. And that really scared me. And my sponsor said, what's going to happen then? What happens if you get fired? And I was like, I can't get fired. And he said, well, what if you did? Oh, I'll get a new job. That's how simple it had to be for me, because I've got all these stories about the way things are supposed to be, and man, that's a lot of work to keep all that going and trying to match the outside to fit what's going on in your head. Just exhausting. So after about a couple of years of sobriety and getting in the middle, I start to feel better. And it really was 2 years of very active participation in Alcoholics Anonymous, in a home group, in general service even too. I got started in that early on, doing all of that, where I was like, this is working. I really started to believe, okay, it's not me. I thought it was all my busy work that was making it all happen, and it was God working in my life the whole time, and I started to realize it. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous not believing in God, and I used to get in fights with people towards the end of my drinking about whether God existed or not. And people would say, we don't want to fight about God. We want to have a good time. Shut up, And so for this alcoholic to go from I was proud of, I'm an atheist, I'm a communist, like all this crazy stuff. And I started to believe in God. And, what's also happening during this time is I become a part of a home group. And I love that you mentioned the 3 legacies in the intro, because I prayed about tonight. And this comes to me a lot when I share in the last 3 or 4 years about talking about the 3 legacies. It's just come up for me organically. And what I'm aware of is over the years I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been pretty participatory in the 3 legacies. Definitely I've been involved in strong recovery, working the steps, and then carrying the message to others and working out of the book. That's been a constant my whole sobriety. But I just don't feel like we hear enough about unity and service, So unity, I have been a part of a home group my entire sobriety. That doesn't mean I have willingly enjoyed it. The home group I had in Chicago, Between the Covers, I got in my head that it was too severe, it was too drastic, it's a bunch of fundamentalists, and nobody likes us because we're too rigid about the big book. And so I go get a different home group. And I'm there for a few months. It's a real nice meeting, speaker meeting, but I'm there for a while and I start judging them. And I call my sponsor and I'm like, they're not doing it right. And he's like, that sounds like what you had at the last group. Well, it might not be the group you're attending. And I have this awakening. I'm like, it wasn't that group. And tail between my legs, I go back to the group and I rejoin that group, and I fell in love with it on a deeper level. And I always felt like home there, just the buzz and the excitement and the, they have the hand raised for anybody willing to sponsor. And then there's not a hand down in the whole 200 to 300 people. Every hand goes up. Just really felt a part of. And So my life is getting better, and I know I'm kind of all over the place, but this is the way it's going tonight. So my life is getting better. At a couple years sober, I realize, I've been single for 2 years. I'm working on myself. It was a conscious choice, and I decide, maybe I have something to offer. And that was an internal thing too. Like, it isn't about what you get; it's maybe about what you give. Like, I didn't know that, but that thought comes to me, and I start dating someone, and we enter in a long-term relationship, and we're together. It was close to 7 years, and life is wonderful. I'm active in AA. My work life is getting better. I've gone back to graduate school. I'm in this relationship. I bought a new car, my first new car I'd ever had. And I got a lot of speeding tickets in it too, because it was a GTI and I like to speed. So life is good. And, and I'm with this guy, Jim, and we're getting ready to go on vacation. We're going to go out west to Glacier and Yellowstone. It's, 2-week trip. It's all exciting. And I have one more final to take. And he runs to the drugstore to pick up a prescription before the trip. And I'm getting ready to go take a test, and he's not coming back. And then the buzzer rings. We live in a condo building. The buzzer rings. This is the Chicago police. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's just somebody trying to get in our building. And he says, no, this is the Chicago police. Does Jim Grassi live there? Well, yes, come on up. And he says, and it's the police officer standing in the door. And I'm like, that's really weird. And he says, you need to go to Weiss Hospital. And I'm like, for what? And he's like, well, I'm not really at liberty to talk about it, but you need to go to Weiss Hospital. So I get in the car, and I'm starting to think something. Well, actually, what happened was I told myself a story. I said, oh, he pulled over. He wasn't feeling good. And I'm going to just go in and, see him, and he's going to be fine. And we're going to go on this vacation. So I go in, and they stick me in this room on the side, and they say, well, there's been an accident, and I'm sitting there for 15 minutes. And then this doctor comes in and says, there's been an accident. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, can I go in and see him? And they said, well, no, we did everything we could, but he had a heart attack behind the wheel at the intersection of Broadway and I can't remember. Rick will know that Broadway and Bryn Mawr. And he
Foster Avenue.
Foster, there you go, thanks. And he rolled into the middle of the intersection, and some passersby got the car stopped, and they did everything they could, but he died right in the car. And I was like, what? Like, I thought I didn't even believe it. It was like out of a book or a movie. Like, I just didn't believe it. And so my life changed that day. And what I didn't even know was how in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous I was. I just was doing the deal because you told me to do it, and I was being a good foot soldier, and I wanted you to like me, So I was doing AA. And, within a couple of hours, I'm back at home, and everybody from my home group came to my house. I mean, they asked if I was okay with it, but, and I have all these faces of all my friends right with me, right there when I needed it. And my life just really, it didn't fall apart, because I stuck and I stayed in AA, but it was life changing. And the reason I thought about it so much tonight was, I've worked with Rick for at least 20 years, and Rick was the person that said, I will come over and help you empty the closet. Because I would say, I've got to do these things, and I can't do these things that I needed to do, like send out thank you notes or whatever I had to do. It was so difficult. And Rick said, I'll help you. And he came over and he helped me go through the stuff in the closet. Yes, no. And we packed everything up because I could not have done that on my own. And, that's what walking shoulder to shoulder on a path that really goes somewhere that's what it looks like. And that's the bonds we create here in Alcoholics Anonymous. So, so I go on from there. Life does eventually get better. I mean, it took a long time for me because I would go to meetings and I couldn't even hear people. And I would think, you got problems? You don't know, when somebody would say, oh my God, I had words with my boss. And I just would think, F you. That's what I would think. And I had to just keep showing up in Alcoholics Anonymous, even though I didn't feel like it. So I continued to work with others. I continued to be active in service. During that period right after that, while I was still in Chicago, I went to work at the central office and helped run the bookstore there, which was an amazing, wonderful experience. I went to the job interview and they said, why would you want to work here? And I just started crying because I was like, well, why wouldn't I want to work for Alcoholics Anonymous? And they said, oh, you got the job. And I was like, I never heard of a thing where you just start crying at a job interview and they give you the job. But that's all they needed to know. That's how much I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It's how I showed it. And, worked there for a while, but then was ready for a new chapter in my life. And I've met a new partner, Frank. I know some of you have heard me talk about Frank. I meet Frank while we're still in Chicago. I'm healing, I'm participating in AA, and sponsoring others, doing potlucks. That's another thing I didn't mention. Started doing monthly sponsorship potlucks, and I loved having potlucks in my home because of the residual spiritual energy in my home. So I realized I'm ready for a new chapter in my life. And I don't know what it is, because I ended up in Chicago on a whim drinking. I was like, I don't even think I belong here. And started praying about it. I almost went in the Peace Corps. But I got a sit down by my mother and my partner, Frank, and they said, we don't think this is such a good idea that you go to the Peace Corps. And I listened to them, and I didn't go to the Peace Corps, but I ended up moving up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We moved up there. We built a house. I did not attend meetings beforehand. My sponsor said, you really ought to check out the AA up there before you go. And I was like, I'll be fine. I don't need to follow a sponsor suggestion. So I end up getting involved in Alcoholics Anonymous up there. And man, was it different. It is one of the least densely populated parts of the continental U.S. Very, very few people. So, my home group, Dawn and I actually started a group, and there would be times where there would be 2 people, and there would be whole winters of 2 and 3 people. Just not a lot of people. So I'm a people person, and I like to be in the middle with a lot of people, and my orientation to Alcoholics Anonymous had to change. And through my friend Dawn, who showed up at the group in the town I lived in Paradise, started asking questions about, does this group have a GSR? She was very friendly. Does this group have a GSR? Do you know what a GSR is? And I was like, oh my gosh, I just wanted to come up here and be left alone. I didn't want to be in the middle of AA again. I wanted to just be an AA member. But this woman found me, and it's God, right? God found me through this woman, just like the other people in my life who came into my life in AA. And she and I start going around to intergroups, to area stuff. Dawn ended up, and I don't mean to tell her story, but it's so much a part of my story. She wanted help, and I helped her get to these women in Chicago. And she ended up getting a sponsor through these women I knew in Chicago, and she's had the most powerful recovery that I've watched unfold over the years. And, watching her recover from cancer 2 times with dignity and grace, it's like, I want what she has, because she's full of the Spirit, So these are the people who I surround myself with today. And so I get involved in general service there. We start going to area stuff, and I end up with another journey there through the service side of the triangle. And I always have to give a plug for general service. I know it's not for everybody, but it's been a big part of my journey in sobriety and participating in, the structure that hurdles Alcoholics Anonymous through the future, right? Because we're a self-governing society, right? So I hear people say, well, they oughta, and I look right at them and I go, well, you oughta, because it's us. We're the ones. So, and I think there's like 5% of us who are drawn to that. And, my job today around that is to keep my eye open for the next person who's got a spark for service, who wants to know who's running this stuff and who's in charge here. Those kind of questions are usually a wink that, that might be a service person. So like I said, I served as delegate in 16 and 17, which changed my life again. A commitment at a much deeper level. Went to New York, and I had a meltdown the night before the conference started the first year. My friend Dawn was my plus one, and she supported me, and because I didn't think I belonged there. I didn't think I was good enough to represent my area and to serve Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. I thought, I'm not qualified. And it was just my head telling me a lie. I really enjoyed that service, really changed my life. And so, a few years go on, and my partner and I decided it's time for another change. And so we came to Hattiesburg in December, and thank God I was willing to dive in fully. Didn't question it one bit. There's such strong recovery here. I have met some really amazing, wonderful people. I sponsor several people here, and one of them is at the meeting tonight, and I think she's tearing up. Being with her changed my life. I got here, and I was like, they don't like me. They think I'm the guy from outside. They think I'm trying to change everything. And I'm like, I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just keeping my mouth shut. But she asked for help, and I was brand new here. And we drove around. I would go pick her up. I'd, drive halfway across town to pick her up. And she was like, are you sure about this? And I said, it is a pleasure. I loved every minute of it. Being in the car on the way to the meeting, and in the car on the way home, and talking AA. And so I guess really what I would say is, working with others is the bright spot of my life today. Doing 12-step work, like going into the jail, going to Clearview. This morning, part of my routine is a 25-minute walk in the morning where I listen to 83 through 88 on YouTube. And I try to have a little walking meditation with that. And I almost forgot to pray today, and I ran inside and prayed, and then I went on my walk. And on the way back from my walk, the Clearview bike crew comes right by me. The Pine Grove, I think it's Pine Grove and Clearview, they bike right by my house. And every one of them, Derek, hey Derek, because I was just at Clearview on Sunday, and I'm like, I can't get away from you people, and in a good way, I'm surrounded by Alcoholics Anonymous. And thank God that God grants me the willingness. And that's the thing I think about lately is I've been here for 26 years. I see people leave. I see people get mad. I see people get frustrated. But apparently God's not done with me, and I'm still willing to come and show up. And I thank God for that. And, I didn't talk a lot about the big book, but I think if you know the book, you heard me talk through what I shared. I mean, it's been all about the book. That's how my life was transformed, was getting into the big book and then sharing it with others. So it's 7:54. Thank you for allowing me to share.